2023 free agency wasted no time getting underway. From over $1 billion in signing the very first hour, life-saving Benjamins, contract-style last generations, if spent wisely, due to impeccable skills, able to crack in the top 200 best basketball players on the planet. Not everybody's gonna like these signings, but that's why free agency becomes super intriguing. Draymond Green wasted no time, agreeing to 4 years $100 million, remaining put with Golden State. The LA Lakers made their presence felt. The most active GM, Mr. Rob Pelinka, one of the best in the business. How's it going, guys? My name's Wilson. Given there are plenty of awful signings that will come back to bite the teams, 8 weirdest free agent signings after a full week since day one. Starting with Jeremy Grant of the Portland Trail Blazers, it's one thing to resign and retain one of the better players on the team, but to overpay like crazy when Dame continues to stay patient with the failure of the front office, not doing shit to make serious changes, but to pay the 29-year-old already reached his ceiling, $32 million each year. That's 5 years, $160 million total. For somebody who's never even been an all-star, somebody who's a third or fourth option on a contender, why couldn't the Blazers just give Grant a 3-year deal worth around 90 or 100? But 160 fully guaranteed? Absolutely mind-boggling. After year 2 and 3, if he wants to go to a contender, could be hard to trade for that massive contract. After Grant's announcement, Dame Lillard officially requested a trade the very next morning, having enough of the front office's failures, retaining a guy who plays 63 games, going 28 and 35 for a 13 seed. With the cap going up, the deal won't end up looking like the end of the world, but 3 years from now when he declines, that contract will sure look brutal. For being 6'8", averaging less rebounds than his starting point guard, credit to Grant and Rich Paul for getting that money. A quality player, but a max guy on a losing team ever since leaving Denver, a combined record 54 and 110. Hard to imagine another team paying Grant 5 years for somebody at his very best, more like the 6 or 7 all-star injury replacement if you ask me. Portland just sending out a message, setting themselves to be just mediocre with no path, but pray their young players become good. Grant only hope to get out of Portland if he balls out, puts up empty stats, convincing better teams to trade for him. Denver overpaying for Reggie Jackson, worth over $10 million, a player option year 2 for somebody who barely played, struggled to find his footing on both ends, out the rotation completely by the playoffs. Why in the world would Calvin Booth use the team's mid-level exception to Reggie, who struggled making a real impact on the floor? Unless he brings extraordinary value to the locker room, we get that he's the likable hometown kid from the Springs. A free championship, 6 total playoff games, 18 minutes of postseason play, in a possible 20 games, 3 total points the entire playoffs. At this stage of his career, sounds like a more expensive DeAndre Jordan. Perhaps the team believes with a full season, he'll get more comfortable with the team. A super confusing decision that probably wasn't even necessary to begin with. Clipper fans, before getting rid of him, saw his decline, wanted no more of the 32-year-old. We all know the loss of Bruce Brown might hurt, but Reggie simply cannot replace his defensive upside. While useful role players like Seth Curry, who signed for 2 years $9 million as a deadly shooter, and Shane Milton, a much younger, better backup point guard, signed 2 years $10 million, 99% of Nuggets fans rather have one of those two for that contract than having Reggie, a low percentage volume shooter. Absolutely mind-boggling to say the least. Dennis Schroeder of the Toronto Raptors. Team made a huge mistake for not trading Van Vliet at the deadline, knowing they won't want to pay the 29-year-old heavy max money. After failing to even make the play-in, team stuck in no man's land. Masai Ujiri, a little too prideful in his guise and doesn't seem to have the guts to pull a Danny Ainge. Dennis, a defensive-minded point guard, well-suited as a backup, but not a great shooter or a floor stretcher. Team simply needs more shooting around Scotty Barnes, and Schroeder, at times a ball stopper, simply takes the ball out of the promising third-year star. 2 years $26 million. That's fair for Dennis, but what's a reasonable plan for the Raptors? Fighting for a play-in? Nobody's scared of them in the East. Resigning Jakob Poeltl to 4 years $80 million tells me they're still serious about competing with real playoff aspirations, but a lot of Poeltl's success came off the pick and roll with Fred. Now Van Vliet's gone. The only reliable 3-point shooter, Gary Trent Jr., a bench guy and buckets only. Shooter simply won't elevate the team overnight. Toronto hasn't gotten better, a full mid-level exception. The weaknesses simply not addressed. In a shooting NBA era, Gabe Vincent simply would have been a much better fit, a cheaper poor man's version of Van Vliet. Team won't be good enough to make serious postseason noise, but won't be bad enough to get a top 3 pick. Signing Shooter seems more like a panic move. Dillon Brooks of the Houston Rockets. Many casuals not only in disbelief, but were convinced he'd be with the Shanghai Sharks. Instead of working to fix dumb bricks, was supposed to practice learning Chinese, giving the disgusting antics, cockiness, talk all the trash, the instigator with the immature Grizzlies, drawing more attention on the antics nonsense and embarrassing himself in the biggest of stage, cannot back up his trash talk. One of the worst shooting forwards in the game who takes twice as many shots as necessary, a disgusting 10.5 points on 31% shooting, 10 of 42 from 3 versus the Lakers, many of them wide open, not good without the ball. Given the style of Jalen Green and KPJ, Brooks' antics plus offensive style of play, a disastrous combination for a promising young team. Just because the team had massive cap space doesn't mean they need to overpay. After losing out on Mr. Broke, elected for Brooks with a plural, behind the scene loves to bark like a wolf, but performs like a squirrel. Started all but one game last 4 seasons, nearly 30 minutes played. When struggling Rockets fans will be furious, all his shots will brick, will be one of the best defenders for sure and adds toughness, and used to guard the other team's best players. Under Udoka, a 3-year deal worth $45 million would have probably been the most reasonable. Brooks will play plenty next season, but likely already reached his peak when the younger Rockets improve. Dillon likely comes off the bench and not stick around after 2 full seasons on a rebuilding roster. Him on the same team as Jalen Green with their personalities and their pregame rituals will be hilarious to say the least. The crunch time decision making, H-Town the second coming of Brick City. Dante Exum, a guaranteed contract to Dallas, the former 5th pick constantly derailed by injuries, spent last 2 seasons playing in Europe, averaged 13.2 points in 23 minutes, a move that came out of nowhere. 6 lackluster games with the 2021 Cavs, hasn't played more than 42 NBA games a season since 2017, an awful shooter, good on D, but struggled mightily to develop. No offensive game, seems like just another Frank Ntilikina type deal, and we all know how that went. New members of Dallas front office, Dennis Lindsey, the one who drafted Dante Wild with the Jazz. Seeing an Exum, Kyrie, and Luka lineup playing consistently together, just almost unimaginable. Although many of Dallas's moves has been good, this one's super confusing. Joe Ingles to the Orlando Magic, 2 years $22 million, super overpaid for how little he produced last season with the Bucks, coming off ACL surgery, arguably the slowest small forward in the entire NBA. Not sure if he can even outrun DeAndre Jordan in the sprint, gets cooked on defense, has good outside shooting and playmaking, but likely doesn't play more than 15 minutes a game. If the Magic just want him to be a good locker room presence, Michael Carter-Williams could have done that for just 10% of the price. Team already has Jalen Suggs, Gary Harris, Markelle Fultz, and Cole Anthony. Hard to see Ingles getting more minutes than those guys. The fact that Ingles got paid more than Russell Westbrook, an absolute travesty. Needing to fill in salary space, at this point, many expected Ingles to sign with a true contender to finish his career. Montrezl Harrell, a 1-year deal with the Sixers after barely playing at all last season, and the team already having signed the disappointing Mo Bamba. The 24-year-old Paul Reed, more playable than Trez, hasn't been signed yet. Bamba 2 years $6 million, given Embiid's injuries and Bamba's high risk of being a disappointment. I guess Trez viewed as an insurance safety at the 5, but the NBA simply outgrew his capabilities. A total 7 minutes last postseason, and that included Joel missing 2 games. Declined his player option to sign a vet minimum, a huge regression from being coached by a doctor to a nurse. Rivers the only man to fully ever utilize Trez, a one-dimensional scorer as a 6th man at his best when there's a great pick-and-roll guard playing alongside him in Lou Williams. None of that was done in Philly. Many forget Harrell's still in the NBA, only made headlines for getting into it last season with Giannis shooting jumpers post-game. Perhaps Daryl Morey still hungover from a wild 4th of July weekend. Was he partying at the strip club with James Harden? Right now, Montrezl Harrell ain't no bargain, simply a waste of a roster spot. Perhaps new addition Pat Beverly, his old teammate, can somehow turn Trez to a useful player again. 90% of Sixers fans don't approve of this whatsoever. The process literally went 10 steps backwards. Kyle Kuzma, 4 years $102 million. For a terrible stinking team, congrats to Kuz getting that bag. A move that doesn't make Washington much better or worse. Only interesting thing to watch, How massive his sweaters get pre-game, nothing else. A good big wing, many believe he'd be a third or fourth option on a contender. Instead, we'll be spending time on a 27-win squad. Super unlikely he'd be in Washington year 3 of his deal. Teams simply don't have a real game plan but to trade him sometime down the road, similar to Portland giving Jeremy Grant that big contract. Who's supposed to be the type of guy to draw more dramatic attention free agency. Many now disappointed. Kuzma staying put in Washington now can be introduced, the co-CEO of light-skinned 55 shots combined for 55 losses Hoops Capital. Some of the other weird deals includes the Knicks getting rid of Obi Toppin casually for 2 seconds, Houston giving massive money to Fred VanVleet coming off a struggling season, more millions per year than his previous shooting percentage, but an established NBA champ who will be looked upon to change the culture and attitude of the team, an interesting fit with him and Dylan Brooks, giving Jock Landale 4 years $32, who else bid for that? Thanks so much for watching. What other signings didn't make sense for you? Let me know in the comment section below. More good stuff coming soon. See y'all next time.